This happened to me when I was only 12 years old. During the summer of my 7th grade year, my family decided to take a trip to Alabama to visit my grandfather's estate. He had just recently passed away from a heart attack, so, unsurprisingly, my family was very distraught. My mother was the executor of his will, so she was in charge of the estate and taking inventory of all my grandfather's belongings. As we pulled up to the house, I got an eerie feeling. The house is located in a more trashy neighborhood. A couple years after our visit, the house was broken into, and all the copper wiring from the house was stolen. So that gives you kind of an idea of the kind of scumbags that my grandfather had been living around. The house itself kind of looked like that house from the Amityville horror movies. It was 2 stories with a basement. It had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms on the top floor, and 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom in the basement. It had wood floors, and the ceiling was unpainted. The only place in the house where the ceilings were somewhat painted was in my grandparents' bedroom. It had a sequence of X's forming a pattern across the ceiling. This bedroom was particularly big and had a bathroom in it. It's also the room that my grandfather died in. My grandfather was 6'7" and 300 pounds, so I guess that was what it attributed to his heart attack. The house's exterior was made of wood and sat on 10 acres of land, another 100 acres if you count the land that was leased. The land was littered with old, rusty cars that my grandfather used to collect parts off of. The inside of the house was rustic, and the furniture looked like it was bought from a Goodwill. It smelled musty, a smell I can't really associate with too many other things. Just to be clear, I'm not knocking the house. My grandfather built the house with his bare hands, so I had a lot of respect for it. He and my grandmother had spent the first 3 years building the house living in the basement. The basement smelled even worse than the upstairs. It smelled like old, dead air. The kind of smell you would smell in an abandoned house in the middle of the woods. It had a kitchen, a living area, and a bedroom. I liked to spend a lot of time down there, snooping through the wide variety of items my grandfather had down there, from old radios to old police monitors. My grandfather had everything down there. On one particular day, my parents were outside taking inventory of the vast collection of mechanical parts, and I was snooping around in the basement. As I was down there, I started to hear noises above my head. It sounded like footsteps coming from my grandparents' bedroom. I figured it was one of my parents in there coming back in to grab something, so I shrugged it off and continued with my snooping. The sounds never went away, though. It sounded like a crescendo, starting out soft and gradually getting louder, and then starting all over again. It sounded as if it was walking back and forth. I decided to go up and investigate the noise, but no one was there. I was creeped out, to say the least, so I joined my parents outside, where I stayed for the rest of the day. Fast forward to that night, and I was back in the house. I was forced to sleep in my grandparents' bedroom, despite my protests. Luckily, I was sharing the room and the bed with my grandmother, who happened to join my parents on the trip. My parents were going to sleep across the hall. Me and my mom got into some argument, and I was forced to go to bed early. I was in this creepy bedroom alone, while my grandmother was right outside the bedroom in the living room, watching TV. Despite the noise coming from the TV outside the bedroom was extremely quiet. It seemed to take on an aura of its own. The bed faces the door going out to the living room, and the bathroom door sat on the right side of the bed. So here I was in this creepy bedroom, laying on my back in bed. As I was laying there, I began thinking about the footsteps I had heard earlier in the day. I didn't like it in that bedroom. The air inside the room felt suffocating. As I was laying in the bed, I heard a noise inside the bathroom. I lay there motionless with my head turned towards the bathroom. My eyes were locked on that closed door. The bathroom wasn't big at all. It was like the size of a storage closet. And I will never forget the noise that I was hearing from that bathroom. It sounded like a gargling sound, like a choking, gargling sound. I really can't explain how scared I was. I just laid there paralyzed with fear. Several seconds went by, although it felt like hours, and the sounds were quiet. It fell silent again, even more silent than before. I was still too scared to move. I wanted to scream out to my grandmother, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I rolled over on my side so I could permanently keep my eyes on that door. A few minutes went by before I started to notice something again. The handle on the door was slowly moving from one side to the other, as if someone were trying to open it but couldn't bring themselves to do so. I just stared in complete horror. My mouth was hanging open. The latch on the door slowly moved, and the door began to creep open. It was an inward swinging wood frame door, so it would be opening away from me. As the door began to open, all I could think was that I had to get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The door opened about halfway before it stopped abruptly. It was dark in the room, but the TV from the living room outside illuminated the door a little bit. I could see a dark shadow moving around in the bathroom. I couldn't quite make out the shape of it. It looked extremely dark, sort of like a black hole of darkness. All of a sudden, a face popped out of that darkness. I was horrified. It was my deceased grandfather. His head and face were showing, but not his body. It was almost as if he were peeking out at me. I was even more weirded out by how close to the door his head was. It was about an inch underneath the door jamb. His mullet-like gray hair hung to the side of his thick glasses, just about covering his whole face. Words can't even describe how terrified I was. I contemplated getting out of bed and running to the door, but the thought of my grandfather reaching out and grabbing my legs and pulling me to my room quickly pushed the thought out of my mind. So I just lay there and stared at him. He stared back at me, and then he began to smile. Oh, God, that smile. That smile let me know one thing. That wasn't my grandfather. I don't know who or what that thing was, but it wasn't my grandfather. The smile had dry, caked-on blood surrounding it. It was pure evil. The head began to move its way up, past the door jamb, until it finally stopped at the top of the door, which had to be 7 feet high, its eyes never leaving mine. It began to creep its way from the side all the way to the middle of the doorway, its dark body just about covering the whole door. I couldn't stand it any longer. I closed my eyes and screamed louder than I had ever screamed before, over and over and over again. Finally, my dad burst through the doorway, followed by my mother and grandmother, their faces filled with sheer panic as they flicked on the light and looked at my face. I was pale white and staring off into space. They began questioning as to what was wrong, but I couldn't say anything. Eventually, they calmed me down enough where I could finally tell them what had happened. They first looked at each other, and then back at me. I could tell that they were skeptical, but scared at the same time. My father went and checked out the bathroom, and of course there was nothing in it. My mother finally moved me out of that room into a different bedroom on the other side of the house. I never heard anything else about the incident from my parents. I'm not even sure if they believed me. All I know is that writing about this 10 years later still gives me the creeps and sends chills down my spine, probably because of one disturbing fact that I learned a couple of years after the incident, when the house had finally sold. My grandfather didn't just die. He committed suicide in that very bedroom that I was staying in. A gunshot to the chest. I was extremely close to my grandfather, so I know that he would have never done anything to scare me as badly as I was that night in that room. So whatever that thing was, I hope I never meet it again. It's that time of year again, where the darkness feels that much darker. and every creak and groan of your house feels that slight bit more unsettling. It's that time of year where your sense of fear and dread creeps more deeply upon you, and your fears are suddenly heightened. But there's no need to fear. We have the perfect solution for you. Spooktober 2024 is once again sponsored by VENATOS. As you all know by now, VENATOS offers the topmost quality in gaming equipment, and with their top-rated customer service, you won't have any buyer's remorse nightmares, even if you live on Elm Street. You can avoid the terror of added fees because VENATOS ships free to the United States, Canada, and hell. Well, hell, Michigan, that is. What are you waiting for? Go to venatos.com today. Still scared? How about you use code PRESSSTARTMOM at checkout and save an additional 10% off your order? That should keep the monsters at bay. For now.